Pakistan, people doing hip thrusts and stuff, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. So you find this new crazy movement. When does it turn into a research project?
Good question. So I'm getting asked all these questions, and I hate not knowing the answer. I hate guessing. And back when I first started blogging, I think you're trying to prove yourself. I'm not as good of a scientist.
You actually are a scientist, though. Like you have a PhD in biomechanics. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you've done probably more EMG research on lower body movements than probably anyone in the world.
I actually think I know I have with all the case studies I've done. So because I've done so many, probably 50 clients where we do like 3 straight hours of, all EMG, every single exercise they do.
And what is that, by the way, for people that don't know?
EMG stands for electromyography. It measures the electrical activity of muscles.
So when someone says like this works the glutes and it works it more than the hamstrings, as an example, like this is a way to quantify how much activation the muscle is getting. So
it's a way to quantify, but there's just a new paper that came out that casts some doubt on all on everything I've ever done. But no, it's bothered me.
Damn.
Yeah.
You should leave that out. I don't know.
Well, this has always bothered me. Okay, so if I had you guys get down into a deep stretch, a full squat, and squeeze your glutes, it would measure around 10% of maximum voluntary contraction, isometric contraction. Then you stand up, flare the feet out just a little bit, squeeze the glutes as hard as you can, and now you get 100. And I'm like, it can't be that different. But
it's not just about activation. It's about there's many other factors that contribute to hypertrophy.
Yeah. There's range of motion. There's time like the not just time under tension, but you need a long enough contraction because it all comes down mostly comes down to tension on the muscle fibers, but muscle damage and metabolic stress contribute as well. But tension is the key driver. But like plyos have really high activation, but they don't lead to as much hypertrophy because it's too fast.
Yeah.
You don't have the cross bridge formation to put all the tension on the fibers. So that's why you either have to lift heavy above like say 85% of 1RM, heavy enough to have slower contractions, or go to close to failure to where they slow down and you're grinding them out. Mm-hmm. That's why those two methods both build equal hypertrophy.
You say like the amount of tension is important and then the time under tension?
No,
or is that a different concept?
Well, because you could do plyos for like 2 straight minutes, but each contraction is too short.
Right.
So you need like
there's not a lot of total time there.
It needs to be a slow enough contraction to get adequate tension development. But anyway, God, what was the question again?
Research.
Oh, yeah. Why did I become? Yeah. So you might have to do that with me. I go off on tangents and get lost. So
that's where the magic is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
People would ask
like
me.
You did that without me.
People would ask me questions, and I don't know the answer to them, and I want So that's why I got my PhD. It was never to become a research professor. I never intended on. I'm a gym rat. I'm a personal trainer. I love being in the gym. I don't like publishing papers. I don't like responding to peer reviewers. I don't like that whole game. But I have published like 42 papers, I think.
I don't like it, but I just do it more than most people.
I've done it dozens of times.
No, that's because I'm good friends with Brad Schoenfeld, who we're a good team together. And I know you guys had him on the podcast. So
yeah,
he just called me yesterday and with a new idea. So we're always he's curious like me. So. And we'll call each other and like, do you see what this person wrote on Facebook? They're so wrong. We need to do a study on this. But then we also joke that we're not very good at predicting things because our hypotheses are about 50-50. We're wrong as much as we're right. So
I think that makes for a good scientist, I think a lot of scientists, they create these studies that they could be wrong, but then they end up like manipulating it a little bit, massaging the data, and then their conclusions don't match.
Yep.
Like I was like, well, your methods say that, but your conclusions kind of like what?
And especially if you're good at stats, you can finagle some things.
Yeah, so I think it's impressive that you hear a researcher say, hey, about half the time I'm wrong. I think that's a good sign.
That's when you Stu Phillips started coming out with this whole lightweights builds muscle just as good as heavyweights, and Brad and I, this was, 7 years back, we're like, no, there's no way you can lift light weights and gain as much muscle as heavyweight. And we'd be like, I like Stu, but I don't know about this. And so then we did our own study, and then when it's your own study, you're like, okay, I know I did it right. I controlled all the variables and get good methodology. And so then then we're like, okay, yeah, okay, we've changed our mind. We agree with Stu now. It took us a while though. He deserved he deserved more respect early on, but he's helped change the game for hypertrophy because
you're talking just about building muscle mass,
just
not necessarily about getting strong while building that muscle mass.
You have to go heavy.
Right.
It's so specific.
Right.
It's intramuscular coordination. It's a skill. So for strength, you got to be doing heavy lifting. For hypertrophy, if you don't like heavy lifting, you can go lighter and just rep out. And as long as you go close to failure and do enough volume, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
But that's important because some people don't like going heavy. Also, some people don't like repping out. Like you guys, when you trained at my place a couple weeks back, you do what I do. Like I've written off like 10 rep squats and deadlifts.
Yeah.
You do mostly singles, doubles, triples, work up to something heavy. Then you do speed reps.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's great because then you do it frequently and you don't hate it, and you'll do it for life. And then you can get your reps in with other movements that aren't so freaking demanding.
Well, and you just came off a knee injury, so everything changes. Everyone's healthy and everyone's a superstar until that one day where life kicks you. And,
and you have to learn.
Everything has to change.
You have to learn the hard way too, because until you get injured, you're like, yeah, these guys have to play it safe, but I'm invincible,
Yeah. So getting back to the research piece, when you look at the glute, just as a muscle region, how are you? Kind of the cross sections of it. You have not just the hip thruster, but I think you've revolutionized whatever this frog pump phenomenon is that's happening. What are the pieces and exercise selection that you go with to kind of dissect the glute a little bit and build as much muscle around that as possible?
Okay. So kind of like three main. If to simplify, I try and if I'm designing a program for someone, I try to make sure they get 1 or 2 exercises from these 3 categories. So that leaves a lot of options open. So the first category is your what I call horizontal or anteroposterior movements. These are where you're like supine or prone, or if you're standing from a cable column but pulling you back, but it's front to back resistance, as opposed to squats would be vertical because it's coming from above. It's axial loaded. When you do a hip thrust or like the top of a back extension, it's pulling you down, and the vector, the force vector, or if you were to like trace the vector of the loading on you, it's horizontal in nature. So we try and do a couple of 1 to 2 horizontal loaded exercises, 1 or 2 axial or vertical loaded exercises, and then 1 or 2 lateral or rotary exercises. There aren't a ton of rotary exercises, but like
this is rotary exercise.
Well, like,
what's
see
an
that over
example
there.
of that?
All right, see that over there, the thing sticking out of with the red band on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That TRX sells that, but it's the Ripcord trainer or something. But there's not enough tension on it. Like
for normal people, there
for
is.
a 250-pound man.
TRX didn't have you in mind when they designed it.
Mass market.
We're gonna go meet the 0.5% of people.
No, trust me on this. You guys would be doing it, and you'd be like, it's not. And even you will reach like you can't just keep stretch the type of band, the cord it is. It stops. You can't just keep stretching it. So I replaced that with that, and it's amazing. So you can go out, walk really far out, and just really feel it. And there's a way to do it too. You don't want to get the band too close to your body because then it wraps around. You want it out far from the center line.
I've seen cable attachments like that where it's just a big long metal rod with a hook on the end of it.
The cook bar, yeah.
That's right.
So you can do cable resistance or band resistance. Those work well. There's other things like the exercise you were telling me about. You had the mace, and you were doing like lunges and things like that. But really, you want a pure rotary vector, meaning like if you were to draw, a longitudinal axis through your body and it's out here.
Yep.
There's only one company that makes something like that I've found, and they don't sell it. It's this Ground Force 360 machine used in research. They only have a few of them. But you see these athletes, that it's like the thing comes from above and you have this harness and you like twist with it. It looks awesome. I wish I had one, but maybe some companies can develop stuff like that. But you can use the problems with bands. Every exercise has shortcomings. For example, squats at the top, they're easy. You don't have resistance through a full range of motion with exercises. So rotational things, you have a cable and it doesn't stay this far away from you the whole time. It will cut the line of force will get closer to you.
It'll shift, yeah.
And then you don't have torque. So or torque requirements. So but most of the exercises in that category are lateral. All the different lateral band walks, all the different standing cable exercises, they're hip abduction movements. And you can do 2 types. So we alternate. One day we'll do a frontal plane hip abduction movement, and then the next day a transverse plane where you're flexed, where you're bent forward. So it could be band seated or just from a hip hinge position where you're like that. So they work different parts of the glutes. And so if you wanted, so from an aesthetic standpoint, let's say you just wanted to focus on your lower glutes, axial loaded exercises are best for that. Squats, lunges. They still work a little bit of upper, but they proportionally activate more of the lower fibers than the upper.
That's what we want.